My name's Alice. If I've not met you before, I'm part of the team here at the church. And it's just lovely to have you here this morning. If you've been around these past few weeks or so, you know we have been talking a lot about our vision as a church, our vision to see Wales renewed and our city restored. It's been a big few weeks, hasn't it? At least I think so. And there's even more to come, so don't worry. And this all feels like, to me, as we're doing this series, it feels like it's coming also at a time where we are just experiencing his presence really powerfully every time we gather together. I don't know about you, but it feels just a really exciting time for us as a church. Now, as well as a moment for vision, we've also talked about how this is a season for outrageous generosity. And today, I just want to talk a little bit about that some more. Now, the truth is that in order for us to be obedient to all that we feel like the Lord is calling us to as a church, we will need some more financial resources. You have a booklet on your seat. I said you can take them home just and have a read through those this week. But in a nutshell, so you know what to expect when you do look through it, we have estimated, we've done our sums, we've worked out that we will need to raise £1.2 million over the next 3 years as we look to plant more kingdom communities across Wales, as we structure all of our existing sites, including this one, for growth, all of our ministries for growth, as we invest in the next generation, which I know Gary spoke about last week here, as we grow our Restore Compassion outreach, and as we just continue to push into sharing the gospel in the city and nation. So it is a big number we need, of course it is, to renew the nation. We don't exactly know how we're going to get there with that number, to be honest. We don't know if it's all going to come in this kind of season of us asking or whether this is going to be more of a faith journey for us to go on over the next 3 years. But we are like trusting in the Lord to provide in whatever ways he wants to. We're praying for heaven's resources to be released. But we do also know that it starts with us, his people. It starts with us being generous with what he has given us in order to see this vision realized. So what we're going to do is we are going to put aside the whole month of March, and we're going to kind of see it as a bit of a giving month where we're just going to keep giving that opportunity for people to opt in. It's going to be a season of saying to the whole church, like to asking people to prayerfully consider how we might give. At the back of the booklets, you'll see there's all that details of how you might indeed play your part. So do take it home and just be reading it this week and be praying about it this week and just bring that to the Lord. So today, with this in mind, I just want to talk a little more about giving and just paint a bit of a picture of what a generous life can look like. Now, I know as soon as I mention the subject of money in the room, it can get a bit awkward. In fact, don't they say the 3 things that you shouldn't talk about at a dinner party? Money, sex, and politics. Well, I spoke about sex a lot last year. Money today. Please still invite me into your homes. Now, more seriously, as a pastor, it doesn't always feel like the most comfortable thing to talk about. I know that you might be new here today and you're like, oh no, is this one of those churches where they try and get all your money in order to pay for the minister to have a private jet? Now, just ask anyone that has been around at all and they will tell you we are really not one of those churches. We don't actually talk about giving all that much. So if you're here for the first time today, then it's your lucky day. If you do stick around, though, you will see that we are a church that is passionate about our discipleship to Jesus. We take it seriously. We're passionate about following his way for our lives. And the Bible, well, it has a lot to say about money. How we spend our money, Jesus tells us, has a direct relationship to what we love or worship. It reveals the state of our hearts, where we put our trust, where we put our affection. Jesus taught that where your treasure is, there is your heart. Or put another way, that our bank statements tell us the things that we value the most. So this is important stuff that we can't get away from, even if it does feel a little bit awkward to talk about it and to teach on it. And just to say, though, if you are here and you're just exploring faith, then just know that today perhaps is a talk more for people a bit further on that journey. So no pressure, but just maybe see this as a chance to understand a bit more about how Christians are called to be generous with their money and finances. And I do hope if you are new to faith, exploring faith, that has been your experience with any followers of Jesus that you've known them to be deeply generous people. As a church, we want to be known for our generosity. One of our 5 values actually is outrageous generosity. And we want people to encounter this church, and as they do, to encounter a deep generosity that's just like in our DNA, that speaks of God's generosity to us, don't we? A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about how generosity was one of the hallmarks of the church at Antioch in the New Testament. They were a church, if you remember, that gave sacrificially where they saw a need. Barnabas, who was one of the leaders of the Antioch church, when he first comes into the scene in Acts, a few chapters before, in Acts 4, when he sells his field, and he gives all the money to the Jerusalem church that he's a part of at that point. And if you read through Acts and just see how the early church kind of grows and explodes, you'll see time and time again that the early followers of Jesus were known for their generosity. Like their faith conversion seemed to create this radical shift in how they then understood their material wealth. Like they were there, if you read through it, like through Acts, they were like just giving everything they had in order to see the kingdom of God extended. And this had a huge impact on those that were on the outside looking in. You know, in fact, a key reason that the early church movement couldn't be stamped out by the Roman Empire was because Christians were so generous and looked after so many people in their local communities and in their cities that it would have made the Roman officials very unpopular if they'd then tried to put a stop to that. You know, we kind of likewise believe that being a generous church, being generous people with our lives, our money, our skills, has the capacity to speak volumes to this city and to this nation about the person of Jesus and life in his kingdom. And this is massively countercultural in a world of me, me, me. But to do this, we need to go on that journey, both individually and collectively, of generosity. And because of the hold that money can have over us, you know, as we'll see in a minute, Jesus refers to money as a master that can enslave us. Generosity doesn't always come that easily. It's like a battle that we have to fight, a muscle that we have to exercise and grow. There is this intentionality that I want to think about that is required in order to become more generous. You have to be intentional about it. Now, this kind of heart posture of generosity that I'm talking about goes beyond how we spend our money and handle our finances. Of course it does. But these things are such an integral part. They're so foundational that if we can get it right, our hearts can be unlocked in such a way that the whole of our lives become marked with grace and generosity in all that we are and all that we do. So like this is big, what I'm talking about. But the invitation, just to bring it down, is for each of us today to take that next step on the journey of generosity. What's the next step? You know, we will all be in different places as I speak here today. You know, for me personally, as I've just been writing this preach, I've been kind of both convicted and envisioned with this fresh sense of what this could just look like in my own life. You know, and I hope that as I speak this morning, that might be how you leave feeling as well. So today, I just kind of want to highlight some of the key things that we have to understand along the way of this journey of generosity as we go deeper and deeper on that journey. So the first thing we have to understand, as I've just said, is that how we handle our finances is a key part of our discipleship to Jesus. Jesus spoke a lot about money. You know, the only subjects that Jesus spoke more about were the kingdom of God, his Father in heaven, and faith. Coming in at number 4 was money. John Wimber, founder of the Vineyard movement, said this as he addressed a bunch of Vineyard pastors back in 1992. Are people's finances really none of our business? Jesus didn't think so. 12 of his 38 parables had to do with money, as did 1/6 of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It is now clear to me that pastors have a responsibility to preach and teach about money, for Christians cannot grow to maturity until their hearts and minds are conformed to Scripture on their use of money. And then pastor and writer Gene Getz similarly says this: unquestionably, the greatest hallmark of Christian maturity is generosity. Isn't that interesting? They're both saying the same thing, that the mark of someone who has a deep level of relationship to Jesus, in whom the Spirit has done a deep level of transformation, is that they are generous. Which, of course, begs the rather kind of challenging question in the room for any of us here that would like to think of ourselves as mature disciples. Would the people in your life describe you as a deeply generous person? It's clear that Jesus understood the corrosive effect that money can have on our discipleship to him. This is what he taught on the Sermon on the Mount. He said this: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So he says that there is this power that money can have as it contends with God over the human heart. You know, we often tend to think when it comes to money that we are the ones that are in power, have power or control. Not the other way around. But Jesus teaches that if we're not careful, it is money that masters us, money that has power over us. You know, money says, give me your heart, your devotion, I will save you, which Jesus points out is just a lie. It's a shaky foundation on which to build your life, on which to put your hope and your confidence, because material things can just be lost in an instant, he says. Jesus' teaching is so wise, isn't it? Like, in a way, nothing has really changed since he taught this 2,000 years ago. Like materialism, consumerism, you know, the kind of outworkings of a misplaced devotion to money have such a hold on so many people, including many of us, Jesus' followers. You know, come and buy your happiness is like a headline of our culture. And it's disastrous for so many, as the Apostle Paul will later preach. The love of money, greed, is the cause of so much sin and pain in the world. So learning to invest your treasure in heaven, to serve God, not money, is so freeing for us as disciples of Jesus. The kingdom is the only place worth investing your heart, your life, your money in. But the truth is, as I said, unless we're kind of intentional about leaning into the way of Jesus on this, it is hard not to get just swept along in that cultural current. As with all discipleship, we need to put practices and habits in place to help us grow in generosity, to build this muscle of giving. And this is where I think the practice of tithing can be really helpful as a practice to put in our lives. This is where you regularly give 10% of your income to the Lord. The first fruits of whatever you earn, each week, each month, you give to the Lord. And this principle of tithing is found in the Old Testament. It started with Abraham and then was eventually codified into the Old Testament law, where the people of God were just instructed to give a tenth of everything that came their way, everything they produced, they gave back to the Lord. So, for example, we read, a tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. Now, for what it's worth, tithing is the guiding principle that Matt and I work to in our giving. We give 10% to this church and have done so for many years. And I know that is true for many people here, that you give to our church regularly. Tithing is a practice that has served many Christians for centuries. Now, I appreciate there might be a bit of resistance in the room as I talk about this. Maybe you've never done that before. The idea of giving 10% of your income to your church, it's just a guiding principle. You're not under law to tithe. I'm certainly not commanding you to do so. But I do believe that having this practice in your life where you regularly give a proportion of your income to your church is a helpful step in this journey of generosity. And as we'll come to in a minute, you know, I hope that if you are part of this church, that our vision is something that you actually want to give to and be a part of, instead of having this sense of obligation to give. So tithing is like a step on the journey. It's certainly not the end goal. Like the end goal of all spiritual practices is more of Jesus in our lives, like more and more of his freedom that he promises us, where we love him more and more and our hearts reflect him more and more. You know, it's worth saying Jesus was critical of the way in which the religious people of the time were tithing. You know, he taught that it is possible for someone to tithe everything that they have, but to do so out of religious compulsion and meanness, not a generous heart. And so the danger for those of us that do already tithe or give regularly, that we do so begrudgingly, thinking that that is the totality of what it means to honor God with our finances, kind of missing the point of what a generous heart on fire for the kingdom actually looks like. Come on to that in a minute. But putting in place in your life the habit or practice of giving regularly to your local church is a good habit to put in place. And so if you're here this morning and that's not something that you currently do, can I invite you to consider doing this? This is something for you to work out before the Lord. I would invite you to be intentional about talking to the Lord about that this week. I shared this story from a couple in our church. They were very, very kind, and they shared their journey of giving regularly with me. They are like super intentional, these people, in the way that they give. And I thought it might give a helpful insight on what it looks like to intentionally kind of bring that conversation in your family and before the Lord. So this is what they said. This is their story. When we were students, we came across the idea of tithing. We'd both grown up with parents who gave to church and to various charities, but the idea of giving a regular sum ourselves was new. We felt convicted and decided to start giving 10% to the church, as well as giving to another charity each month. Before we got married, we did the pre-marriage course, and one of the topics to discuss was finances. We agreed to always give a minimum of 10% of our income to our church and to be open to God speaking to us about other opportunities to give on top of that. A year into marriage, we felt God calling us into a situation which would significantly reduce our income and to trust him. We felt at the same time an invitation to increase our tithe to 15% for that season. We prayed together and felt peaceful about it, despite the fact we didn't know how we were going to make ends meet. Throughout that following year, we never went without anything we needed and were blessed with so many things that brought us so much joy. In that time, we learned to fully trust the Lord with our money and to provide for us. Since then, there have been a number of times when the church or the Vineyard movement has invited us to consider giving financially towards something specific. Each time they say we have prayed separately, shared with each other what we feel God is saying, and then prayed together about how best to proceed. As a rule, we tend to go with whoever felt the higher number as a challenge to press into generosity and not fear of lack. This doesn't mean we are reckless with our money. We have done the CAP money course, which was amazing and helped us to develop a budget which we stick to and regularly update. We also now have a savings pot called additional giving, which we pay a small amount into each month, allowing us to respond to any urgent need we come across in the lives of others we meet in our day-to-day. Growing our muscle of generosity has taken time, they say, and at moments has felt painful. The urge to hold on tight to our money can feel almost overwhelming. But we have never regretted giving what we have, and we cannot wait for the day when we will see how God has used every penny. I love that. I love that intentionality by which they've thought through their giving. I think that's a good challenge for us to do the same. Now, before we move on, I do just want to speak to anyone in the room at the moment who is struggling financially or who may be in real difficulty with debt. Now, hear me when I'm saying I'm no way saying that you need to start giving in a way that will put you in more debt. Instead, I just would invite you just to pray and to ask God what it would look like for you to go on that journey of generosity with him. You know, years ago, I worked as a support worker with CAP. We just mentioned them. They are a debt relief charity, Christian debt relief charity. We work with anyone, though, to support people in debt, to support them out of debt. And I remember, you know, as I was supporting this lady, meeting then with this CAP worker, this debt advisor, and the three of us sitting down to do her monthly budget. And I was amazed when the debt advisor then said to her, well, look, do you want to consider in this new budget giving like £1, £2 a month back to CAP? I was like, can you ask someone to do that? And as I reflected, as I kind of drove home afterwards, I realized that actually that invitation for her to give was actually giving her dignity. You know, she was then being invited to contribute, however small a way that might have been. You know, it made me think of the widow's mite, if you know that story. Because generosity doesn't look like everyone giving the same amount. It looks like everyone playing their part. So look, have a think, prayerfully consider what this might look like for you as we share our vision to see this nation renewed. So firstly, this journey of generosity starts with understanding that how we use our money is just part of our discipleship to Jesus. And then we then start to give from a place of obedience to him in that. But I don't think the Lord wants to leave us there. I think the next thing to understand is that we then get to give from a place of kingdom vision. You know, giving is a chance to partner with the Lord in seeing his kingdom come. You know, in Luke's translation of Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount on money, which I just read in Matthew, but in Luke it says this. This is from verse 31 in Luke 12. Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give you everything you need. So don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to those in need. This will store up treasure for you in heaven. And the purses of heaven never get old or develop holes. Your treasure will be safe. No thief can steal it, no moth can destroy it. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. So it's the same teaching, but you see in this version, kind of Jesus frames his teaching on money in relation to the kingdom. Don't worry, he says, little sheep. Seek the kingdom first and foremost. God's given you this. He's given you his kingdom, and this is so much more precious than anything you could gain for yourself on earth. So live your life seeking the kingdom. And Jesus says that this is such a great way to invest your money. You know, we often talk about how are you going to invest your money. And Jesus says, well, invest it in the kingdom, because that is the only investment that will last for all of eternity. You know, as I read in that story just then, that couple then said at the end, we have never regretted giving what we have, and we cannot wait for the day when we will see how God has used every penny. You know, years ago, when I was 18, I went and did a year out, and I worked in Warsaw. That's Birmingham, not Poland. That's Warsaw. And I was a youth worker. I was based in this local Methodist church, and this church was built some kind of 60 years before. It was a church that was very different to this church in so many ways, but it was one that was marked by outrageous generosity. I mean, they offered radical hospitality to people, myself included. They opened up the doors of the building each week to serve the poor, to serve the lonely in their community. I used to help run this Friday night youth club, which was like, well, I mean, it was wild. There were kids in there, like, I mean, it was crazy. The police used to come by every week just to check in. But you know, this church was outrageously generous to those kids. This was a church that was literally built on the outrageous generosity of the people that founded it. On the bricks of the building itself were the names of each person who had helped build the church. Their names were literally on these bricks, and their names were there even after they had long gone. And as I thought about this over the years, I think there's something really deeply powerful about the legacy of that. As I said, many of those people whose names were on the bricks had passed away by the time that I was there. But the memory of all that they had given some 60 years before remained. I just think it's such a great image of what it means to invest in the kingdom. It means putting your name on a brick. As we see God's kingdom, as we seek his kingdom to come here in Wales, as we contend for the renewal of this nation, as we invest our resources with eternity in mind, the invitation is for you to come and put your name on a brick. And you know, as I say this, I'm mindful of all the people that have been in this church over the years, for all the bricks that you have helped put in place through your generosity to this church. This church has been built through so many people giving and continuing to give. So thank you. I love that we get to do this together. So we give from a place of obedience, we give from a place of partnership in the kingdom. And then the third step on this journey towards kingdom generosity is when we understand that giving is an overflow of his grace. As the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Corinth, he tells them about this Macedonian church, the churches in Macedonia, and of how ridiculously generous they are. It's like made such an impression on Paul. And this is what Paul says to the church in Corinth as he talks about these churches in Macedonia. He says this: they are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor. But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. So these were Christians who were experiencing poverty themselves, but they were still begging Paul to be able to give, to help others. So deep was their generous heart. You know, reading this makes me think of a story which I love, which I know we've shared before in our own context, about 10 years ago. And we received this note one day from a family who were in our church at that time. And this is what it says. We've got a picture of it. I think. Sorry, Keith, I've put you under pressure now. You haven't got it? Okay, don't worry. Let me share it with you. There was £40 worth of Tesco Club Card vouchers and a note. And let me read what the note said. It says, "Dear Sir, Madam, we are asylum seekers and are not quite sure how long we will remain in Cardiff. While we are here, we are being provided with accommodation, and we also have Tesco vouchers to buy our food. As we do not have money, we are unable to pay our tithes and offering in cash. Therefore, we would be grateful if you would receive our tithes and offering in Tesco vouchers until we have some money of our own. Sorry for the inconvenience. God bless. P.S. They work well at the tills." I mean, isn't that amazing? These people gave us £40 worth of Tesco Club Card vouchers. I mean, talk about overflowing in rich generosity. I'm still deeply humbled and challenged by that note some 10 years later. I mean, how do you even get to be generous in that way? To give even when you lack? Where you just feel joyful and overflow just in everything that you do with this kind of rich generosity. Like, how do you do that? I mean, the church in Corinth, I imagine, were probably asking the same thing as they heard Paul boasting about these churches in Macedonia. Wow, how do you even do that? And Paul explains to them kindly that it is that the key that unlocks this kind of generous heart is grace. He says this: "You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich." This transforms our understanding of generosity, that Jesus has been so generous to us. He's been so gracious. He has given us everything. All that we have, it's all a gift. and one that we cannot earn. And this grace is so deeply transformative, it has the power to change us from the inside out. It shifts how we understand what we own when we realize that everything we have is a gift from him anyway. That we're not owners of what we've got, we are stewards of what the Lord has given us. It's all the Lord's. It's all for his glory. And so when we understand this kind of question of, well, how much should I give of what is mine? Kind of flips itself on its head. This question then becomes, well, how much should I keep from what the Lord has blessed me with in order to give the rest away? That's a very different question to ask the Lord. How much do I keep, Lord, to give the rest away for your glory, your kingdom? It's all yours anyway. So we may give out of obedience, and of course, we may give to vision, but generosity kind of bubbles up and overflows when we learn to give from that place of grace. It's like someone just pouring on a tap into a glass and just it keeps going, it keeps going. Grace produces the kind of followers of Jesus who are like wildly generous in every way. Grace produces what I like to think of as giddy givers. And a couple I knew a long time ago, they remember them sharing the story that if they ever had any money left over, they were like living on a very, very tight budget. And what they'd do is at the end of each month, if they ever had any money left over from this budget, they'd then pray and they'd say, right, Lord, who should we bless with what we've got left over? They'd think of someone maybe in the church they knew was financially struggling. Maybe they just had a sense of someone to go and give this money to. And then what they'd do is they'd go and they'd get the cash out in those days of cash machines. Do you remember those? Gosh. And they'd go and get some cash out the wall and chuck this cash in an envelope. And then they would drive to that person's house that evening. And then they would like run up to the door, but like quietly, shove the envelope in the door and then just like peg it back to the car and drive off. And I remember them telling this story and talking about how they would just be beside themselves, giggling with laughter as they tried to drive off unnoticed that evening. I mean, isn't that an amazing story about these giddy givers where it's just an absolute joy, absolute laugh, as it were, just to be like, go for it, go, woo, off we go. People just overflowing with grace and love for those around them. People that hold their possessions and their money lightly, that give freely and happily. People who use their finances to show God's overflowing, abundant grace in the world around them. I mean, what a picture of life in the kingdom. I'm just like, God, use us to be that kind of church, a church that just overflows with generosity into this city and nation. And so as I finish, I just want to kind of come back to where I started. In this season of vision, like we are asking everyone in the church to consider how they can be generous. And so on this journey of generosity, what is the next step? What does it look like for you? You know, if you don't have the practice of regular giving in your life, then I'd just invite you just to start doing this. You know, the truth is that if everyone who called this church their home, their community, started giving regularly each month, the impact that would have on what we could do as a church would be enormous. It would be a complete game changer. Maybe you do already currently give each month, thank you, but maybe you just have a sense of stirring of like, I could give more. Like maybe it's like, well, what can I go without in order to give more? Maybe you're being asked to give a one-off donation in this season as we talk about renewing the nation. Maybe like Barnabas, you're being asked to like sell a field and then just bring the money and give it to the disciples' feet, as it were. As we begin this kind of next chapter in the life of this church, as we extend our reach into Wales, as we're like planning and praying for what it would look like for God to renew this land, can I just ask you just to consider how you might play your part, how you might be a giddy giver, how you might put your name on a brick. Amen.